On the 17th of April 1975, Cambodia's capital city still had a population of 2.5 million. "24 hours later, it was a ghost town. The streets were empty, the inhabitants driven out of their homes. On Thursday, the 17th of April 1975, the Khmer Rouge cleared Phnom Penh. On that fateful day, after 5 years of guerrilla warfare, the communist Khmer Rouge surrounded the capital. The Cambodian military regime, despite being propped up by the Americans, was on its last legs.
Early in the morning, at about 5:30, thousands of haggard villagers from the suburbs came to Phnom Penh. They're coming. Who? The Khmer Rouge.
Father Francois Ponchot was living on Monivong Boulevard, Phnom Penh's main thoroughfare. On the same street, not far away, war photographer Roland Neveu sensed a scoop. I was by the station when I noticed there were quite a lot of people on Monivong Avenue, and as I reached these buildings, there was a group with trucks, APCs and things like that, with flags. I wondered what was going on, if it was a liberation or something. The flags seemed quite strange. That's when I realized they were soldiers, who were a little too well dressed and in too good a condition to have spent weeks fighting in the suburbs.
We found out later that they were soldiers who wanted to seize power instead of the Khmer Rouge.
These putschists thought that by seizing power they would be in a position to negotiate with the Khmer Rouge, who were hot on their heels. The joyful population saw them as liberators. Perhaps they were celebrating because the war was over after 5 years. You could understand that. But they were celebrating. They probably didn't know what they were celebrating. Sensing that this was a historical moment, the photographer decided to remain on Monivong Boulevard. Events started to accelerate as the Khmer Rouge entered the city. I arrived at this crossroads, which is one of the main ones in Phnom Penh. I noticed that things were changing, and that's when I took this photo. This is a column of Khmer Rouge. You can tell, and they stank. You could really smell them. These guys had spent days in the swamps. Many of them had no shoes on their feet. They were armed to the teeth. They weren't joking around. They really were disciplined, walking in single file like in the jungle, exactly the same. And suddenly there was silence.
At 10 o'clock, a deathly pall covered the city. These little men in black were just 100 meters away. They started checking everybody. For the first time after 5 years of war, I saw drivers with their hands in the air being searched by these little Khmer Rouge. They were opening their trunks, searching their cars. The soldiers were ditching their uniforms and weapons in the middle of the road and running off in their underwear.
They started disarming the soldiers right there on the crossroads. Gradually, I saw the pile of weapons start to get bigger. And I think it's really a great photo. And at that point, I was really alone. All the disarmed soldiers were taken to the nearest stadium. Most of them were liquidated there and then. With the army neutralized, the Khmer Rouge ordered the evacuation of all the hospitals. At the Calmette hospital, any patients who were not well enough to leave were hacked to death.
About 11 o'clock, something unforgettable happened. All the injured, all the sick going past the bishopric, still with the drips in, and the able-bodied were pushing their sick beds. I remember here, just by the gates, there was a guy with his foot dangling from his trouser leg. He asked me to take him in. I said, "No, I can't. If you stay with us, you'll be killed. Take to the road like everyone else." Those are images that haunt me to this day. All those sick and wounded people writhing, some with missing arms and legs, hitting the road and heading north. From 2 o'clock onwards, the Khmer Rouge went by with radio cars saying, "You have to leave quickly, the Americans are going to bomb the city." It was plausible because in 1973 the Americans had dropped bombs all around the city from their B-52s. The whole population was terrified, so they listened to the Khmer Rouge and everybody packed the roads to leave the city. I saw hundreds of thousands of people walking very, very slowly, wearily towards the outskirts of the city.
Forcing the population of Phnom Penh onto the roads was part of the Khmer Rouge's plan for enforced ruralization. Dens of all iniquity, all urban centers were emptied. Considered exploiters, city dwellers were deported to the countryside. A quarter of the population was sent to the rice paddies for re-education. The story starts in the early 1950s when the country gained independence. At the time, 20 Cambodian students were given a scholarship to study in Paris. They would become the principal leaders of the Khmer Rouge.
They were students who were sent to France. Salazar, who would become Pol Pot, who left in 1945, Ieng Sary, Khieu Therit, his wife, and other intellectuals who for the most part were members of the Communist Party and returned as communist volunteers.
At that time, one person had a central position on the country's political chessboard: President Prince Norodom Sihanouk.
In those days, in Cambodia, Sihanouk was everywhere. You heard about him all the time. He was the father of Cambodian independence, the father of Cambodian sport. He was a god king.
In the mid-1960s, Hong Tong Hong arrived in Paris. A moderate socialist, he studied political economics. Suong Si Kwun was also studying in the capital. He was close to the Cambodian Communist Party.
Early on, young people were more or less anti-Sihanouk. Sihanouk was accused of being a French puppet. If you'll excuse me, but that's how it was at the time.
Initially tolerated by the Sihanouk regime, the young left progressively became more intransigently opposed to the regime.
Sihanouk started to crack down on them in 1962, 1963. He killed a lot, hundreds of Khmer Rouge. So much so that the small group returning from France had to hide in the forests, first in Vietnam, then in the Ratankiari region of Cambodia.
Sihanouk would dub these mainly communist guerrillas Khmer Rouge. Hiding in the bush, the intellectuals honed their arguments, which would evolve into the foundations of their revolutionary ideology.
When they met people who lived in the mountains, they noticed that Rousseau's theory of the noble savage was right. These mountain people lived an inherently communist life. I used to go there from time to time. The men wore a simple loincloth, the women a little skirt, and they lived from hunting and gathering. Everything was shared. That's when they had a kind of enlightenment, like Buddhists, and they decided that that's what they wanted to do in their country, starting from scratch with the whole population heading back to the country and living like these mountain dwellers. We were fueled by French revolutionary literature. Robespierre, Saint-Just. It was pure. It was attachment to the masses. It was sacrifice and abnegation that drove us. And everything that was to do with our life and personal happiness was irrelevant.
In Paris, teacher Laurence Pic met the student Swoang Sihanouk. She shared his ideals and would soon share his life.
My life with Cambodia began the year I met Sihanouk. This ideal of contributing to a country's development, the social structure of the country, was very exciting. I'm from the post-war generation, meaning that the future had to be better, and it was perfectly natural that we should get together and live that life together.
From Paris, the couple watched Prince Sihanouk's policy of neutrality with regard to the war in Vietnam between the Viet Cong and the US. The gradual expansion of the conflict into Cambodia plunged the country into chaos. Originally, a road, considered a main axis, crossed eastern Cambodia, the Ho Chi Minh Trail. For the North Vietnamese, the trail was strategically vital to their reconquest of the country. Sihanouk had to turn a blind eye to these turbulent fighters who were gradually invading half of Cambodia to escape American bombardment. In March 1970, violent anti-Vietnamese demonstrations took place in Phnom Penh, and the Vietnamese embassy was ransacked. Angered by the prince's policies and keen to expel the invaders, Prime Minister General Lon Nol fomented a putsch with the help of Prince Sirik Matak and support from the USA. On the 18th of March 1970, while Sihanouk was traveling abroad, he was overthrown. Forced into exile, the prince sought refuge in Beijing.
This was an incredible stroke of luck for the Khmer Rouge. At the time, there were probably only about 3,000 of them. In his wisdom, Lon Nol asked the Vietnamese forces, who were in safe havens along the Vietnamese border on Cambodian territory, to leave their sanctuaries. And that's what they did, not to go home. They invaded Cambodia and rounded up all the young people in the countryside and created a national liberation army. All these young country boys and girls became Khmer Rouge soldiers. The Americans helped us a lot. First, there was the putsch, and then there was the American bombing between February and August 1973. 6 months, that's 200 days and 200 nights with their huge B-52 bombers. They hit the Cambodian rice fields, they hit Cambodian villages, and the Cambodian peasants were not happy. And if they weren't happy, that helped to fuel the Khmer Rouge's propaganda.
It made no sense to stay in Paris and study when the country was embroiled in such a fratricidal war. It was very hard because of the American bombings. There were the South Vietnamese, South Koreans, Filipino mercenary troops. There were dreadful massacres. So Sihanouk, like many others, went to Peking to take part in the War of Resistance, like what happened in World War II.
Laurence Pic decided to follow Swoang Sihanouk to Beijing. These photos taken there show them with the Khmer Rouge leaders Khieu Samphan and Ieng Sary. Ieng Sary would later become brother number 2 as Pol Pot's deputy. In Cambodia, support for the Khmer Rouge movement was growing. It had recently got the support of a providential ally in Prince Norodom Sihanouk, supported by the Chinese. His remarkable rallying to the Khmer Rouge cause just a few days after his overthrow came as a surprise to everyone.
The first theory is that he wanted revenge. It's very important for a Khmer not to lose face, and he had lost face. He wanted revenge over Lon Nol. And all the time he didn't have Lon Nol's skin and didn't overthrow him, he would get no respite. Secondly, he was convinced that the only people who could ensure the country's independence were the Khmer Rouge. And Sihanouk took the Ho Chi Minh Trail and went to meet the Khmer Rouge. The Khmer Rouge told him that he would be head of state for life, and the vainglorious Sihanouk believed them. Pol Pot was very clever. The putsch was the perfect opportunity to mobilize the prince's supporters by raising Sihanouk's standard. But in fact, on the ground, it was the communists who were acting.
The country would progressively sink into a fratricidal war between two forces. On one side, soldiers from the government army loyal to Lon Nol and armed by the Americans. On the other, supported by the Chinese, the Khmer Rouge, who controlled most of the rural areas. Between 1970 and 75, 1 million people would die in the conflict. It was during the war that ethnologist François Bizot, posted in Phnom Penh, would learn the hard way about the ideology that drove the revolutionaries. It all began in 1970 when he was studying at a Buddhist temple in a zone occupied by the Khmer Rouge. I was unfortunate enough to run into a small group of militants, and as a consequence, I was accused of being some sort of American spy or something. And although it wasn't said as such, I was condemned to death. François Bizot was transferred to Camp M13 in An Long Veng, in the west of the country, to be interrogated. I realized that they wouldn't believe anything I said, that I was definitely, in their eyes, an American spy. The camp commander was a young revolutionary. He followed the party line. He was chatty, smiling, intelligent, and calm. The camp commander answered to the name of Duch. He was a former maths teacher who had gone into the bush. In the camp, the ethnologist, the only French person there, would find out about a superior entity to whom his captor kept referring. Angkar, the Khmer word for organization. The Angkar was an anonymous administrative body that made all the decisions. The children of the revolution were the sons, the children of the Angkar. Angkar was their new family. It was the role model. It was behind you. It was within you. It was the best of all worlds. Keeping you alive is of no use to us. Eliminating you costs us nothing. It designated the good and the bad people. The bad people had to conform to the party's directives, as did the good people. It set the foundations of a new world, a new society, and in fact it was called a renaissance. Revolution means a clean slate and starting from scratch. And you start with people who are perfect and who conform. François Bizot would never find out why the Angkar agreed to release him a few months later. Finally free, he returned to live in Phnom Penh. In early 1975, the Khmer Rouge bushfighters surrounded Phnom Penh. The capital, where 1.5 million refugees from the provinces were sheltering, only survived thanks to an American airlift. In 2 months, more than 15,000 rockets fell on the besieged city. Trapped in the suburbs, the army of the government was unable to contain the enemy's advance.
The 1st of January 1975, the first great offensive on Phnom Penh. I started to see the map on the wall, with all the pens showing the army's progress. And when I heard the news, on April 17th, I was by the map, placing the last few pins.
I was overjoyed. Victory. I was overjoyed. We cracked open the champagne.
The world's press headlines: Phnom Penh liberated, including Le Monde. In Beijing, where we were, there was a party to celebrate. It was quite incredible.
The next day, I heard that the Khmer Rouge had evacuated all the inhabitants of Phnom Penh. My initial reaction was to think more imperialist propaganda. I didn't want to believe it.
At the same time, in Phnom Penh, a young man was receiving orders from the Khmer Rouge to evacuate. I was 13 and a half. I'd gone outside to see what was going on. The Khmer Rouge turned up. They dispersed everyone by firing Kalashnikovs into the air. This young guy, a small guy, came towards me and ordered me to go home, collect my things and go to the country because the Americans were going to bomb the city. So I ran home, I saw my dad, and I was upset. I said, "Dad, we need to get our things. The Khmer Rouge are telling us to leave." His first reaction was to hit me. I thought that was totally unfair. I just couldn't understand his distressed reaction. Phusera Ing is an artist with a French mother and a Cambodian father. On the 17th of April 1975, Phusera Ing and his family sought refuge at the French embassy. My father wasn't allowed into the embassy. They drove us in a car really fast through an already virtually empty Phnom Penh. We got here and there were already a few people at the door of the embassy. My dad pushed us inside and I didn't even have time to turn around and say anything to him or see anything. I found myself inside the embassy and my mother was reassuring us, telling us he would join us. Phusera Ing would have no news of his father for several hours before he finally managed to get into the embassy covertly. The French authorities were overwhelmed by the relentless flood of people seeking asylum gathering at the gates. The French embassy became a kind of refugee camp for foreigners. It suited everyone. It was much easier when the Khmer Rouge saw a foreigner, just like that, off to the French embassy. There were 3,000 refugees in the embassy. Most of the 3,000 refugees were Cambodians who wanted to flee the new regime. Among them were several dignitaries from the former government. On the 20th of April 1975, the Khmer Rouge took up their positions opposite the buildings. The refugees had become their hostages.
These little Khmer Rouge turned up at the door, threatening us with the AK-47, saying, "Get the 7 traitors out here or we'll come in and look for them." We tried to talk to them, saying, "This is actually French territory." They just said, "We've liberated all of Cambodia."
They wanted Sirimatak, the Prime Minister. They also wanted Sihanouk's wife and other prominent Khmers who were hiding in the French embassy. What was to be done? Because it was clear that either they went or we made them go. Or the Khmer Rouge would come and find them. The third notion was certainly the worst and the hardest for all concerned. François Bizot, a fluent Khmer speaker, was at the center of negotiations. But the Khmer Rouge were adamant that they wanted the dignitaries handed over to them. However, he did obtain a guarantee that their lives would be spared.
Sirimatak very graciously thanked us, saying, "You've done everything in your power to help us, but I can see that there is nothing more you can do," and they left with great dignity. And they were doubtless executed in the sports stadium near the Descartes College.
The Khmer Rouge did not stop there. On the 22nd of April, they increased the pressure on the entire Cambodian community.
An officer who spoke very good French gathered us all together by this building. He spoke to his Cambodian countrymen. He said, "You are invited to join the people in rebuilding the country." And then there was complete chaos. I myself said to many Cambodians, "This is your only chance of survival. Leave as soon as you can, melt into the crowd, and you may have a chance to escape."
Everyone was screaming. It was clear that all Khmers were going to have to leave because that was the big question. Would they be allowed to stay or not? But it became clear that that wasn't a possibility. My father remained very calm, took my older brother, my younger sister and me to one side, one by one, and he said his goodbyes. He told us to take care of our mother, and then he left, quietly. We watched him go. We couldn't go any further.
And you never saw him again?
No. There were still around 1,000 refugees in the embassy, and food stocks were running low. François Bizot was sent to find supplies in the capital. I had the feeling I was experiencing something incredible, of being in some kind of nightmare, in a city that had been the beating heart of Southeast Asia, with everything that entailed: activity, shops, movement, a riot of color, of people, of different languages, totally empty. When I went past the bank, there had been an explosion and thousands of 500 riel banknotes were fluttering around the wheels of the Jeep as I slowly drove around the avenues. It was mind-blowing. Having forced the exodus of the population, the Ankar decreed the abolition of money.
One day the Khmer Rouge came to negotiate our repatriation, and the consul asked for French aeroplanes. And the Khmer Rouge had murder in their eyes. We thought they were going to shoot us all. "We are an independent country. We are not your lackeys. We will repatriate you by our own means."
There was consternation. Leaving by truck was unthinkable. That's why so many people were terrified. They worried that it was some kind of a trap, where we would be taken truck by truck to a killing field. In spite of the doubts, 3 days later, the decision was made to prioritize evacuating the women and children by the first convoy. I climbed in the front because I didn't want to miss a single thing before I left. Because I knew full well that I wouldn't be back here for who knows how long. And we went through the city, through all those deserted streets. There was only one point where we encountered any Khmer Rouge. There were people and their kids breaking rocks in the road.
The first convoy left on the 30th of April. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, no news. We assumed that they'd all been executed.
It was 5 days before any news of the first convoy arrived. Reassured, the embassy's last few refugees could take the road to their final destination, Poipet Bridge, the only crossing point between Cambodia and Thailand. By the 8th of May 1975, not a single French person remained on Cambodian soil.
When I reached the border, I burst into tears. I lost all control. Such had been the stress of those 3 weeks. For 3 weeks, I'd felt no fear, no depression or anything. But when we crossed the border into the free world, I couldn't help it.
Not everyone was crying for joy, but we were relieved in a way I've hardly ever been. What awaited us on the other side was the feeling of escaping from hell. A few months later, Laurence Pic made the same journey in the opposite direction. Her decision was irrevocable, and she left Beijing to join her husband in Phnom Penh. Song Si-kun was a major figure in the party hierarchy.
He was very keen for me to join him. As for me going with him, he was my husband, the father of my children. I wasn't going to separate them from their father. The girls were 3 and 4. School was not a pressing matter. I knew there was no school. At that age, they could wait another year.
Like thousands of students, Hong Thong-hung wanted to leave France to support the revolution. As he flew over Cambodia, his heart was racing.
It was very emotional. It was like a dream come true.
When we flew over Cambodia, everyone in the plane was overjoyed. The pilot felt the same. He was flying all over the capital, showing us this and that. And when we landed, it was all over. The runway was deserted. I was at least expecting to see Si-kun.
They took our passports and threw them in a basket. We were told that Angkor would give them back later, but I knew right away there was no going back.
We drove through Phnom Penh, and it was like an apocalypse. Like a bomb had fallen. Everything was deserted, everything was dark, in ruins. It's very unusual to see an atmosphere like that in the capital. As time went on, I was thinking about Si-kun not being there, hoping nothing had happened to him, and so on. But anyway, tonight I'll be in the rural areas. There'll be people, we'll dance, we'll sing, because the Khmers love to sing. It's generally a very happy place.
No celebrations were planned as they were banned by the new regime. Laurence Pic was given a compulsory order of residence in Phnom Penh, in the premises of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, now called B1. Hong Thong-hung was incarcerated here at the Khmer Soviet Institute, which had been a camp for re-education through work for expatriates returning to the country.
I started seeing my old friends, people who'd been abroad like me. They wouldn't speak to me. They were thin, badly dressed, all in black. And it immediately reminded me of the dreadful films I'd seen about Soviet re-education camps or the death camps at Auschwitz.
In Phnom Penh, everything had changed in just a few months. The city, in which only a few tens of thousands of people were surviving, was divided into 4 autonomous sectors. No private vehicles were permitted. Life was entirely dedicated to industrial but also agricultural production.
There was an attempt to ruralize the cities. For example, in Phnom Penh, they planted coconut trees in the central market. And then the pavements were dug up to plant fruit trees.
Every unit had to grow its own produce, and at the same time have some left over for Angkor. That's not the easiest thing to do in the city. At B1, we were lucky to have a patch of waste ground that was dug over for cultivation. So we grew things. We grew turnips, cabbages, aubergines, and lettuces.
We had to be re-educated, like labourers and peasants, by work, by physical labour.
There was a whole process that I called disidentification. We all had a pseudonym, another name. We all wore the same uniform, the same hairstyle for everyone, same jobs. No more personal identity, no more professional status, no social status, no family status. We were reduced to nothing. And it was expressed in this language that I called newspeak, like in 1984. No hello or goodbye, no more thank you, how are you? You have to realize that this was a collectivist regime. We were together all the time. That meant if you said something, if you were in a bad mood or had done something wrong, it would be noted by someone in the group. And then it would come back to haunt you in the evening. Every week there was a session of criticism and self-criticism. You had to stand up in court, have your conscience examined in front of everyone.
We were brought together with a Khmer Rouge official. It was, have you worked well? While you're working, do you think about your old life in Paris, the past? It was always the same thing, but it was difficult because it was always your fault somehow. If you worked well, you pretended to work well. If you didn't work, it meant you had a reactionary attitude. It made you wonder why, what was the agenda? What was the ultimate goal of it all?
It was like we were held captive. You weren't allowed to be self-sufficient. You always had to go and eat in the canteen. It meant that the role of parents was completely cancelled. You no longer had a relationship with your children, those creative moments, those meals together. You had absolutely no choice over what you had to eat. There was nothing to eat anyway. Soup twice a day was not really enough.
While the general populace was condemned to live on the breadline, in the Olympic Stadium, the leaders of the new regime were celebrating the first anniversary of the revolution with great pomp. Pol Pot and his highest dignitaries reviewed the army, a way of flexing their muscles at their powerful Vietnamese neighbor. The Khmer Rouge army was massed on the border and war was imminent. The regime made a deal with the Chinese leadership, weapons for rice that the population so badly needed. This planned famine led to the extermination of part of the population.
There was this campaign, what I call dehumanization, because you were not meant to feel any emotion. You had to be a cog, feel nothing but hatred for the enemy and unconditional love for the party. So much so that people were brainwashed so that they could kill as easily as stubbing out a cigarette. It even gave them the feeling that they had done a good job. There was no longer any emotion or humanity.
The country became a penal colony. Laurence Pic was separated from her daughters Soka and Naren.
So I asked to leave, and Sikuen said, it'll be you without the girls. But there was no way I was going to leave without my girls, to leave my girls in that situation.
That was my great wrong against her and my children. I didn't try to understand, because at that time, to understand would be to stop my journey towards the realization of my project, to become a good communist. Do you see?
In 1977, the country experienced its second revolution, marked by Pol Pot's increasing grip on power. Outvoted for a time, the dictator regained the upper hand by bloodily crushing a rebellion at the heart of the party. Racked with paranoia, the new Angkar became harsher and more repressive to those it considered the enemy within.
To defeat the enemy without, you first have to destroy the enemy within. Angkor.
The first disappearances happened on January 1st, 1977. Our friend Sian and his wife. I went to the room they'd lived in, and I saw it was in a mess, and I thought, oh dear, something's happened. And then it all happened very fast. There was talk of purifications and purges. The regime had to be clean and pure. There were plots everywhere, and there were traitors who were sent for re-education.
Most of the people in this photograph would be arrested. They would suffer the same fate as Laurence Pique's friend Mrs. Van Pinie. In 1978, Mrs. Van Pinie and her baby were sent to the dreaded S21 detention center. Laurence Pique would never see her again.
I had to repair sewing machines in all these shops for the Khmer Rouge. The workshops were here. I took care of repairs here until the 28th of October 1978. That was the day they asked me to go and fix cars in Vietnam. They came to get me in a little truck. There were 3 of us, and instead of taking us to Vietnam, they took us to Tuol Sleng prison.
Chum May and his friends were the victims of a new wave of purges. Tuol Sleng prison, where they were taken, was a former college in the city centre with the code name S21. It was an interrogation centre run by Duch, Francois Bizot's former jailer.
When I got here, I was handcuffed and blindfolded. They made me climb the stairs by pulling my ears, screaming, "Climb the stairs!" Then they put me in a cell. They made me sit on the floor. Once I was on the floor, they shackled my feet. Then they took the handcuffs and blindfold off. They pulled the curtain made from a rice sack, so I couldn't see what was going on outside. But I could hear their comings and goings. They gave me this box to defecate in. If I wasn't clean, I had to lick the floor with my tongue. If I refused, they beat me. The only food they gave me was 2 ladles of rice cooking water twice a day. I was very hungry, so I tried to catch cockroaches, lizards, or mice to eat. But I had to be discreet. If they caught me doing it, they would beat me.
For 12 days and nights, Chum May came and went between his cell and the interrogation room.
They tugged my ears to make me sit down. Then they put shackles back on my feet. They asked me how many of us were in the CIA and the KGB and who had got us into the network. I was clasping my hands, begging, "Older brother, I know nothing about the CIA or the KGB." So they carried on beating me. It was when I tried to protect my face that my little finger was broken.
All of S21's prisoners were subjected to the same interrogations and forced to confess their guilt and denounce at least 5 accomplices, innocent or otherwise. Once the confessions were signed, those sentenced were taken to meet their death in another camp outside the city. This was what fed the Khmer Rouge death machine. In 1978, the Khmer Rouge Suong Sikön narrowly escaped elimination.
I was accused of belonging to a CIA network. I wasn't arrested because there had to be 5 accusations to be arrested. There were only 4.5 against me. The half was down to a student from the Soviet Union called Ing Peek. In his confession, he said that all the intellectuals who came from France were revisionists. As I was not mentioned by name, I only got half a point rather than a full one.
At the end of 1978, Vietnam, weary of Khmer Rouge army incursions on its territory, launched a general offensive against Cambodia. In less than a month, half the country was occupied. On the 7th of January 1979, after 4 years of dictatorship, the Khmer Rouge leadership was driven out of Phnom Penh by the Vietnamese army. At that time, Alain Roussio was posted to Hanoi as a correspondent for the communist newspaper L'Humanité. Le Figaro. Phnom Penh falls. Phnom Penh falls again. That's typical Libération. And L'Humanité, the paper I worked for at the time, carried the headline, "The End of an Ordeal." It was a simple observation. It was the beginning of an extremely difficult process for Cambodians, but it was also the end of an ordeal, which is why I used that as a headline. I went to Phnom Penh for the first time on the 17th of January 1979, a few days after the fall of the city. I think I was the first Westerner to go to Phnom Penh in 1979. I knew I was going to find a devastated country and a traumatized population, but I had no idea it would be as bad as it was. All the stories I heard were tales of abominations. I met hardly anyone who hadn't lost a family member to famine, lack of medication, or summary execution.
During Pol Pot's regime, we lost 3 children, and my husband went missing. I don't know where he is.
At the time, I was a journalist working for a communist newspaper. I'm a communist journalist, so I couldn't help but be affected by what was done in the name of that ideal. Let's make a clean slate of the past. The Khmer Rouge made a clean slate of the past, but also of Khmer humanity. In the ensuing months, Alain Roussio came back to Cambodia to observe the country's resurrection. From spring 1979 onwards, I started to see life be reborn, the city be repopulated. Not in an anarchic way, the new regime organized things very efficiently. I started to meet these people. This is a funny photo. You see these kids cooling down by a water pipe. That's when I wrote about the rebirth of Phnom Penh in my paper. I was criticized by some who accused me of propaganda, but I was just saying that I had observed the city being reborn and emerging from a trauma. It was an experience that brought me a lot of optimism for humanity, seeing all these people who were survivors and who had a fierce will to live. Here you can see these young lads in the football team. Life started afresh very quickly. Shum May was saved by the Vietnamese entering Phnom Penh. Today, he is one of only 2 survivors of S21 and the most famous witness to this torture center, which has been converted into a genocide museum.
I waited until 2000 before I went to Tuol Sleng. When I saw the names of my friends from Khmer Sihanouk University, who were brought here and incarcerated, and I knew that they were very gentle, inoffensive, very good people, I got angry, but I also cried. Because what were these people doing? They were my people harming my other people.
Siong Sikun still lives in Cambodia and has not turned his back on his Khmer Rouge past. Laurence Pic fled Cambodia in 1979 and has since lived in France with her 2 daughters. Hong Tong Hun, his wife and his daughter, tried for a while to rebuild their life in Phnom Penh. In 1982, they left to live in Belgium.
I used to close my eyes and picture my country, the river, the village where I was born, people fishing. That's all nostalgia. Now, when I close my eyes, it's not the same. My whole family was destroyed. Most of my friends are dead. It changes things.
It was a long time before artist Fusera Ing returned to Cambodia. He is currently working on a project to commemorate the 2 million victims of the Khmer Rouge.
What are you going to call this work?
For those who are no longer here. For all those who are no longer here, that's better.